How do you sleep when the wind owns your house? Imagine the low door, the latch that rattles like a thin bell, the thatch sighing as if the roof itself were tired. Smoke hangs beneath the rafters in a mild gray ceiling. It stings, it comforts, it preserves the wood. Someone banks the embers with ash. Someone else counts the creaks and gusts, testing if the weather is only unfriendly or intent on mischief. A rushlight burns short as a moth's breath. Boots steam by the hearth, stuffed with straw so they will not harden. The dog turns once and folds himself against the clay wall where warmth lingers longest. In the pottage whispers. Yesterday's barley, chopped onions, a heel of salted pork, the color of dusk, a ladle of ale to wake the taste, a pinch of last summer's herbs. Beside it warms a dark half-loaf of rye, heavy and faithful. Steam rolls out when the lid lifts, and the house answers with a warm animal smell. People, wool, earth, smoke. Through the partition, the cattle breathe like bellows. Their slow heat climbs through timber into bone. Children sleep curled like commas. An old dog thumps once in a dream and goes quiet. The rushlight shortens. The room becomes a small universe built around a red heart. Winter here is not an accident. It is a system. The house is a heat machine. The calendar, a survival plan. The village a net that catches the falling. Nothing is wasted. Linen against skin, wool above. A hood to hold breath where heat escapes quickest. Mittens tied with a cord so a child will not lose them on the lane. Pattens lift leather out of sucking mud. Light is rationed because warmth is rationed, but the room still glows from the mouth of the oven and the quiet constellations of coals. Listen carefully, and the year speaks. The quern scrape lingered from yesterday, when the last of the autumn rye became flour smooth as honest dust. A broken cart pin mended by the door remembers the mallet's thud. The spindles purr promises cloth. The barns dream in their frames. In the fields winter grain sleeps under frost. Brave rye and cautious wheat fallow rests. Hedges wait like tightened belts along the lanes. Even in darkness the map of work is visible, drawn in habits, repaired in stories. There is grace in this, not luxury, not misery. An arrangement learned over centuries and relearned every bad year. Salted meat brightens a Tuesday. Cabbage pickled into courage opens a Thursday ale. Mild as a friend, turns a cold mouth into a patient one. You break bread, not slice it. You soak it into stew until it yields, and you pass the bowl clockwise because your grandmother said the fire likes it so. Ash saved from the hearth becomes lye. Sweepings go to the midden feeds the field returns as bread. And the bread, steaming, settles the house. But rhythms have edges. Wet summers, blighted fodder, vermin that learn the pantry's secrets. Rumors that harden into rules. A custom that protects until it doesn't. When a door opens in a storm, you can feel how thin the difference is between comfort and fear. The same wind that dries barley on good days will scour the marrow on bad ones. You bank the coals tighter, you count the sacks again. You tell the children a story that knows the boundary stones by heart. Tonight we are not chasing romance, we are tracing engineering, done with timber, clay, salt, prayer, habit, and stubborn kindness. Peasants endured winter because they designed for it. They built houses that breathed just enough. They stacked fuel like promises. They stored the year in cellars that smelled of stone in September. They used feast and fast to meter a larder, and neighbors to repair the arithmetic when it failed. Survival was not a miracle, it was a pattern. Food in the bin is warmth in the bones, and the bin begins in the field. Tomorrow's comfort is already sown months earlier, under a sky that now bangs at the shutters. To understand how the cold months were faced without panic, we must start where winter truly begins, not with snow, but with autumn, when the year bends toward keeping. Rest now, bank the fire. Listen to the rafters, answer the gale with old, patient wood. Taste the smoke in the bread and the onion in the steam. Feel the dog breathe. Hear the kettle click as it settles. This is the threshold where the quiet art of survival becomes visible. Simple, exact, forgiving of little, generous with what it can spare. Before sleep, count the small safeties. The latch mended in dry weather so it will not fail in wet. The water bucket kept off the floor so frost cannot climb into the rim. The spare loaf hung in a cloth sling where mice dislike the sway. The peat cut in high summer now stacked like dark books along the wall. The wooden spoon laid across the pot so it will not rattle the lid and wake the baby. These are tiny answers to large cold. Together they make a language the night understands. bank the embers, and rest. At first light, we'll walk the furrows where this night's warmth was planned. Autumn looks like endings. It isn't. Autumn is design. Fields trade color for promise. The calendar is not a parchment but a choreography in boots. The three-field rhythm writes itself into soil. One plot harvested, one sown with winter grain, one left fallow to graze. Next year the roles rotate. Pattern, not luck, keeps the table honest. In the north and center, rye is winter's backbone. It tolerates cold and poor soil, gripping where wheat hesitates. Wheat answers kindly in milder belts, and barley minds its temper on lighter land. Oats fill bowls and bellies where horses and people share the same grain. Good years build slack. Slack becomes safety when weather goes sour. If a barn sighs with plenty in October, January sleeps easier. Threshing has already begun. Under a roof, flails rise and fall in paired rhythm. Thump, lift, turn, straw flies, chaff, drifts, kernels drum into baskets. The sound is winter's first music. It is not merely labor. It is bookkeeping by ear. A day's rhythm equals a week's bread. A damp patch on a bin is a scandal. A mouse trail is an alarm. One good mouser is worth a sermon on prudence. The field is a map of future meals. Winter wheat and rye push root and nerve beneath frost. Snow is not an enemy but a blanket if it comes deep and clean. Fallow ground carries animals so manure can lace it with spring. Hedges hold soil where wind would steal it. Ditches cleared before the ground locks keep lanes from turning into hungry streams. Every November, task argues quietly with February. Tools earn their winter before dark. A blade finds a stone, a haft gets wedged, a missing rivet is heated and peened true. Cartwheels are trued against a frost-hard morning. Plows are checked, shares greased, yokes mended. A careless iron left for later is a broken promise to march. In the hushed season, repairs hope wearing work clothes. Fuel is its own harvest. Cords of wood dry under thatch or lean-to. Twig bundles for kindling are tied small and tight. In wet, wood-poor districts, peat stacks rise like low libraries, cut in summer, turned in fall, now hard as loaves. Brush becomes the currency of coals. A good household knows which fuel starts fast, which holds through midnight, which makes a forgiving ash for baking day. Markets and dues keep time with the fields. After harvest, rents in kind travel, grain to the Lord's granary, hens and eggs, sometimes a pig or a lamb. In return, custom can loosen its fist. Gleaning rights, commons for fuel, woodland pannage for swine to fatten on mast, not Mersey structure. When structure frays, rumor tightens. If a reeve is stern or a winter harsh, the village remembers every unfair handful weighed on the manor scales. Religion meters appetite and fortune. Martinmas in November marks slaughtering, when fodder math becomes meat math. Advent narrows the bowl. Christmas opens it. Epiphany tidies joy. Then winter steadies toward Candlemas. Fast and feast are not opposites. They are gears. They manage stores, morale, and neighborliness under a story big enough to share. A saint's day can turn a thin week into something worth humming about. Weather is the partner that never keeps the same mood. A sharp cold that locks the lane may still bless the grain beneath. Damp lingers like a thief. Too much wind at sowing scours topsoil and nerves, so people watch unpretending signs. How smoke lays, how cattle eat, how frost writes the sill. A proverb is a small climate model with centuries of field trials. Leisure is a misleading word. Winter is full of necessary, lighter work. Spinning builds thread like time itself. Drawn, twisted, gathered on the distaff in an ever-present task. Weaving grows cloth in a measured miracle. Baskets appear from willow cut in withies. Hedges are laid. Stakes sharpened. Net and line mended. Barn doors are hung true so fox and weather learn their manners. The village breathes through these repairs. Trade threads the cold. Salt arrives in barrels whose heads smell of sea and labor. Stockfish and herring, hard as boards now, will soften into stews that taste of distance. Ale is brewed in the cool, steady temperatures a house can hold. It clarifies while the world goes quiet. Honey, if kept, sweetens a holy day into a memory bright enough to carry a week. All of this is time converted to safety. A sack hung high is less likely to wick damp. A bin raised from the floor will not discover a creeping puddle too late. A latch mended in still weather will not fail in a gale. The clock is agricultural, but also domestic, legal, devotional. It keeps grain, fuel, morale, and obligation in step. When the hands align, winter feels like strict order rather than siege. Still, calendars cannot chew. The test of planning sits under the floor and under the lid. To pass winter without panic, food must not only exist, it must last, and last clean. Stone, salt, smoke, and patience will do that work, if the hands remember how and the house remembers where. The barns exhale full. Now we step into the cool earth to learn how to slow time, to step down into the earth and the air changes. It smells of stone, damp, wood, and last September's breath. A cellar is not a room. It is a season kept on purpose. Barrels stand shoulder to shoulder. Crocks wear caps of tallow or wax. A rack of roots waits with quiet color. Turnips dulled to pearl. Carrots bright as buried sunlight. Onions whispering a spice that warms without flame. Apples rest in straw, asleep until cold. Grain lives in its own architecture. Chests banded with iron, bins on legs, lift bellies above damp. Sacks tie with knots that serve as signatures when ink is rare. A lid opens the way, a lullaby opens, slowly, gently, with listening. You do not wake the future unless you mean to feed it. A hand sinks into grain, feels the cool slide, listens for trouble in the silk of kernels, the faint tick of vermin, the telltale clump of moisture. The cellar keeper is part steward, part detective. Salt makes time behave. Pork and beef go down in layers, white crystals drawing out danger and giving back winter obedience. The smell is strong, but honest. Fish arrives soused or dried from far coasts if roads hold and bargains keep. Stockfish lies hard as fence boards. Herring glints with a memory of sea. In stew, they learn kindness again. Where salt is dear, smoke does the work. Meat hung in brown weather under rafters. Oak and alder telling their story until the flesh darkens into safety. Pickles are winter's small fireworks. Cabbage curls into courage that wakes a tired mouth. Beet stain joy into a bowl. Cucumbers become crisp echoes of summer. Vinegar sings the house awake for a moment and then sits down, polite. Cheese keeps meadow in its heart long after snow has made the world simple. Butter sleeps under brine. Honey holds herbs in amber, summer stitched into medicine. On a bitter morning, a spoon of that gold convinces a child to brave the lane. Storage is not passive. It is a daily conversation with loss. Floorboards are tapped with a knuckle. Ropes are retied. Crocks wiped. Bungs turned. Traps clap in the night. Cats earn double wages. Fewer mice. Warmer laps. A leak is not a nuisance but a thief. A draft is not a quirk but an invoice the weather hands through the door. Quiet vigilance is cheaper than grief. People learn to read water stains the way others read letters. Every house keeps its ledger in memory. Who owes a loaf? Who lent a sack? Who has the safe aloft in a week of rain? Debt and favor move through the village like careful birds, pecking balance out of hard months. When a bin runs thin, pride learns new manners. When a neighbor's pig sickens, smokehouse hours lengthen. Survival is arithmetic, and the figures are human. Upstairs, the hearth completes the storage system. Embers banked under ash sleep like honest coals, ready to wake with breath in a dry twig. Ash is saved for lye and for scouring the clay floor until the room feels sternly clean. The oven remembers every loaf. Clay, cracked and healed, holds heat the way an elder holds stories. Bread emerges dark, crust singing, crumbs steady. It asks not to be sliced but to be broken and dipped. Fuel is a storehouse with its own etiquette. Logs seasoned under a lean-to. Faggots for kindling are tied with the thin patience of last year's hedging. Peat stacks stand like low libraries. Pages of soil cut and dried when the world was green. Now promised to February, the best fuel is the one you gathered when it didn't feel urgent. Birch catches oak keeps the long sermon of midnight. Light is rationed like sweetness. Rushlights burn with friendly smoke. Tallow candles give a steadier tongue of flame, but cost more than many nights can afford. One flame can write a page, mend a sock, finish a prayer. Households learn the grammar of shadow so well that a single candle becomes a theater of hands and bowls. The cellar teaches 3 truths. First, you cannot eat what you did not save. Second, you cannot save what you did not plan. Third, planning is a story you tell the future with your hands. These truths sit under winter talk, from a priest's homily to a child asking why the best pair must wait. When a festival opens the larder, it is not indulgence but design, a metronome for morale and metabolism. Sometimes time refuses to be commanded. A warm spell wakes rot. A burst bung costs a week. A rat learns an angle you missed. Then skill becomes humility, and humility knocks on a neighbor's door with a hat in its hands. Later, the door knocks back from the other side, because the year is long and no one outruns chance alone. Charity is not decoration, it is infrastructure. This is the taste of patience. Barley deepened by smoke, cabbage that once bit and now comforts, salted meat softening by the fire, ale mild as a friend, a spoon of honey bright enough to light a corner of the week. You swallow, you breathe, and the world feels more possible. The larder holds, the hearth will finish the lesson. Let's climb toward the red heart that turns store into comfort. Look first at the shell that holds a winter together. Low and long, slightly bowed by weather, it wears thatch like a heavy cloak pinned tight against the wind. The door is small by design, a threshold that spills little heat each time it opens. Walls show timber bones under wattle and daub, a skin of clay and chopped straw that dries hard, flexes a little, and forgives the season's moods. Nothing here is picturesque for its own sake. The house is an instrument. Its job is simple and exact. Trade a small discomfort of smoke for a reliable store of warmth. Inside, the hearth is sovereign. Stones cradle a patient bed of coals. An iron trammel lifts and lowers pots, so recipes move through height rather than time. A louver high in the roof grants smoke a path. The rest blue washes the beams, laying a lacquer that preserves wood, discourages pests, and turns daylight into warm brown. Chimneys arrive late for common folk. An open hole keeps its old logic. Sting the eyes a little and the timbers will last. In winter, smoke becomes insulation and antiseptic, a household ally with a rough manner. Watch the room like a diagram. Closest to the fire sit age and infancy, bodies that bargain poorly with cold. Farther out, work in progress. A spindle purrs, carded wool in soft heaps, a bench with the strap newly mended and a hinge drilled true, a bucket warming its rim, boots and pattens dry on their sides. Above, rafters host the store, herbs in sheaves, bacon browning, cheeses ripening by patience. Every object knows the exact square foot where it does the most good. Livestock share the plan through a partition. A pair of cattle or a trio of goats sped in straw, their winter breath lending a steady trickle of warmth. The floor tips a little so damp stays where it offends least. A shuttered window of wood against weather with no glass acts like an instrument, cracked for a moment to clear air, pushed wide on bake days wedged tight during a gale while the fire drafts itself through narrow jealous paths. In most houses the window is a verb, not a noun. Beds are engineering. Rope latticed frames hold mattresses stuffed with straw or chaff where fortune smiles. A feather tick lies like a small miracle. Bed curtains make a tent in the room's weather, shrinking the climate to fit a family's breathing. Heatstones, wrapped and slid to the feet, turn a night from endurance into rest. The rule is simple: trap breath, spare fuel. 2 bodies share heat better than 1. 3 share it better still, and in winter nobody argues with the arithmetic. Clothing repeats the logic of walls. Linen against skin because it wicks, wool above because it insulates when damp and forgives the day's demands. A hood keeps the neck from spilling heat. Mittens with a connecting cord spare parents from hunting a single lost glove across a dark lane. Leather shoes are treated like agreements. Pattens lift them clear of mud that drinks warmth the way a thirsty field drinks rain. Cloaks are mobile microclimates. A good one carries the dignity of tool and garment at once. Light is warmth's cousin and is rationed the same way. Rushlights burn with friendly stubbornness. Tallow candles steady the hand but are counted like coin. 1 flame can finish a seam or a page. Many flames mean a feast or a foolishness. Shadows become grammar. People read rooms as if they were sentences, placing themselves where meaning runs true. A chair in the lee of a draught. A stool at the oven's mouth. A pallet where floor and wall meet in calm. Soot and ash complete the cycle. Soot seals thatch and quiet sparks. Ash sweetens sour soil. Scour cleans pots and turns to life a laundry. Sweepings go to the midden. The midden returns to the field to grain, the grain to bread, the bread to bowls, and the bowls back to wash in water warmed on yesterday's fire. Nothing stands alone. The house is a wheel, and the hearth is its axle. Maintenance is worship without incense. A latch that sticks in dry weather will fail in wet. Fix it now, not when the storm insists. Rotate bedding so chaff breaks evenly. Shake straw down to discourage damp and unwelcome company. Replaster a crack before frost learns the path. A house that survives winter is not lucky. It is loved by deliberate hands. Children learn to hear a change in the fire as straw the way others hear a change in tone. Knowledge passes in small phrases. Bank deeper, turn the log, mind the vent, close the door gently. The social life of heat is plain. The best seat by the hearth rotates by custom. Elders, illness, infants, a guest on a storm night. The host's pride is to keep the red heart open without waste. Hospitality is measured in inches toward the blaze and in ladles from the pot. A neighbor repairs a hinge and earns a place closer in January. Share what keeps us human. Count what keeps us alive. Custom places the water pail, the meal bin, and the child's stool, exactly where heat and light agree. All of this is engineering by habit. A peasant house is a heat machine built from local physics and unbroken memory. It turns fuel into comfort, smoke into protection, proximity into survival, and routine into resilience. When the door opens, winter bites. When it closes, well, the room remembers what season it prefers. You can feel the principle in your lungs. Breathe slow, waste little, carry on. With a house tuned, it remains to prove what it sustains. Lift the lid and hear winter speak in the steam. What did winter actually taste like? Start with a baseline. Pottage it hardly ever roared. It murmured, keeping a slow confidence at the hearth's edge. Barley or oats gave it body. A handful of rye crumbs, saved from yesterday, helped it keep its shape. Onions and leeks built the scent. Cabbage joined when a crock opened. Beans and peas dried sensible, patience swelled back to life. If a bit of salted pork took a brief holiday from its barrel, the whole house noticed, and the evening felt easier. Bread was the other pillar. Dense, dark, dependable. Rye ruled on stern soils. Maslin rye and wheat mixed answered where fortunes mixed. Oat and barley breads kept company farther west and north. These loaves were fuel, not fashion. Crusts went to laborers and to children who liked to chew. Crumbs soaked up the day. A village might share an oven firing once or twice a week. Families scored their marks on the dough so no one argued at the door. Bread was so constant that people measured time by it before, bake, after bake, baked. Dairy threaded the cold months in fits and starts. Cows and calves slowed. Goats were more obliging. What milk there was moved quickly, churned into butter when it could be, soured for safety, coaxed into soft cheese while the air stayed cool. A mug warmed at the fire with a crust floating in it could turn a shy child bold enough to carry wood. Whey slipped into bread dough and soup. Modest, yes, but quietly essential. Meat in winter was a memory, rationed like song. Martinmas slaughter turned fodder math into meat math. Pork and beef shifted from pen to barrel. Patience replaced pasture. A thin dice of bacon could make turnips polite. Sausages cured in brown weather taught hunger to wait. On feast days few, glittering the board admitted plenty. A spared joint roasted fresh. A goose if mast had been kind. A rabbit honest enough to confess the snare. The rest of the week ate the idea of meat through broth and dripping. Fish connected poor soils to distant water. Herring arrived by barrel. Stockfish demanded soaking and beating before it forgave the cook. River eels, where found, were winter friends, fatty, reliable, practical. In Lent, fish stopped being choice and became law. Even outside the fast, a salty shard in a stew could turn a long week companionable. Vegetables did not vanish. They changed their voice. Roots came up from cool earth with calm faces. Parsnips, carrots, turnips, beetroot. Cabbage kept a second life in brine. Leeks and onions fought well above their weight. A handful of dried mushrooms perfumed a pot like a small forest. Herbs marjoram savory time were summer's letters read aloud in winter. They asked for little and sounded like hope. Sweets were modest but memorable. Honey was holiday sunlight. A spoon in a child's mouth paused discipline and made a psalm easier to learn. Dried apples or pears visited pottages and pies. If an alewife had skill, a small ale warmed the tongue and tamed the water. A stronger brew marked better days. Cider and perry spoke where orchards held sway. Snow melted in a pot made a clean, quiet drink when wells were cold or far. Spices for most herbs were spice and smoke, the signature. Pepper, ginger, saffron. Costly travelers appeared in manor kitchens, rarely in cottages, but the idea traveled. Pepper became fiery mustard seed. Saffron became calendula petals, lending brightness. Trade taught imitation. Imitation defended dignity. Eating had its choreography. Bowls passed clockwise. Knives were wiped clean to save both edge and cloth. Salt was pinched with care because it was a road in a crystal. Loaves were blessed before breaking pot thanks. Pot counting. The seat by the fire rotated with need. Hospitality measured itself in ladles and inches toward warmth. Picture a winter's day by the bowl. Morning eats last night's pottage, thinned and warmed, with bread kissed by the oven's side. Noon repeats the theme with heavier onion. Supper, after two ledgers go to sleep, offers the day's small victory. A well-behaved turnip, a handful of peas, a slice of bacon big enough to start rumor and fat enough to make sense. The meal is not grand, but it is coherent. It says, we planned, we stored, we kept faith. Yet the calendar could flip the table overnight. A fast arrives, and the pot obeys. A feast arrives, and the village remembers joy. The same pantry that whispers thrift can, by rule and bell, suddenly sing. The bowl is steady, the calendar is not. We turn from daily fare to holy days and hungry ones, from habit to rule the church's page, written in hunger and celebration at once. Communal ovens shaped the week's rhythm. On bake day, doors opened early, dough proofed under cloth, and peels slid loaves into the clay belly in order. The oven was gossip, schedule, and savings account at once. One firing, many families. Fuel spent wisely. Ash raked out at the end, warmed stones for drying herbs. The table is warm. Listen for the bell that decides what the pot may hold, and when. The bell measured more than hours. It measured appetite. In winter, the church's calendar ran like a river through every kitchen. It did not demand silence. It demanded shape. A single peel could change a week. What was fair yesterday must be lighter today. What was meat becomes memory. The table obeyed, and so did the village, because discipline kept stores honest and turned scarcity into a shared story instead of a private panic. Begin with Martinmas. In November it is the hinge between pasture and barrel. Animals that would strain hay through snow become sides salted deep and hung dark in smoke. Plenty arrives at once, but not as reautumnly sorting. Fresh roasts salute the saint. Fat goes to candles and soap. Blood becomes sausages. Bones promise to simmer poverty out of weekdays. Martinmas teaches winter's tongue to speak, rich ones careful for months. Advent follows, a narrow road before wide singing. In many places, abstaining from meat pairs quiet meals to quiet liturgy. Pottage leans on peas and beans. Fish stands where pork stood. Spice where fortune allows access punctuation, not fireworks. Restraint is a metronome for stores. Fewer rich meals early mean deeper comfort late, when tempers and bins both run thin. Christmas breaks the seal not recklessly, but with ceremony. The Lord's hall may blaze. Cottage hearts glow with milder echoes. Ale runs easier. Pastries return after a month of thrift, and even poorhouses hear a richer sizzle. Gifts are edible and practical. A shared joint, a finer loaf, a pot of dripping that turns a lean week friendly. Hospitality is not theater. It is infrastructure disguised as joy. 12th night ties the ribbon. Sometimes with bounded misrules traded for an evening, so laughter unknots what hierarchy has tightened. Then work dresses again, and winter continues. Saints' days dot the cold like stepping stones, each justifying a candle, a ladle, a story told twice. Fast days outnumber feasts, yet they do not press the heart flat. They turn appetite inward and attention outward. Alms expected. Neighborliness encouraged, the pot stretched by arithmetic done together. Wednesdays and Fridays bring fish or simple fare where rules are kept closely. Lent will arrive later with a stricter hand, but winter already trains the body to become lighter on command. Rogations and blessings thread the season, granting fields and flocks to heaven when human keeping reaches its limits. Candlemas in February returns light indoors with blessed tapers that feel like proof against anxiety. Tiny flames make rooms look brave again. A taper at a sickbed or during a gale says, we are not alone. Others keep this rhythm too. The manners role matters. Custom can oblige the Lord to dole bread, ale, and sometimes meat at major festivals. This is not modern charity. It is rent reversed. Villagers judge a lord by the fullness of his Christmas ale as surely as by the fairness of his measures in October. A stingy hole sharpens winter. A generous one softens argument. Foodways become ritual shapes. The Yule log is promise, not merely fuel. Flame will meet flame through the long dark. Where rare spices appear, they carry stories of distance. A single saffron thread can make a custard taste like travel. A wafer stamped with holy signs breaks with dry music. Bitter greens keep a seed for spring long before buds open. This rhythm tames fear. When storms stack against the door, when a cough worries a bed, when a rat gnaws, people point to the next bell and say, "There, we know what to cook then. We know what to hold back now." Rituals do not feed bins, they feed resolve. Resolve conserves bins. Frugality wears a festival mask and does its work in secret. A shared goose becomes bones for broth, fat for pies, drippings for bread, and favors to repay. A strict Friday balances a generous Sunday. Candlemas lights keep some children from fearing the roof's voice. An epiphany story keeps a teenager from counting only losses. The calendar guides hands as well as tongues. Bake days, brew days, wash days, and saint days interlock so fuel is used wisely. A fast is not only a smaller bowl, it is a quieter oven, a fire mended and left to glow low. A day when spinning comes forward and heavy chores withdraw. A feast is not only a larger table, it is a hotter oven, a bright room, a neighbor invited toward the blaze. In both cases, the house learns to breathe on cue. Put simply, the church teaches winter to be rhythmic, not random. It writes meaning over months that could feel like one long gray decision. It does not erase hardship, it teaches hardship to keep time. The body learns moderation. The larder learns pacing. The village learns reciprocity. The bell resumes its old work. It measures appetite. Listen, there it is, falling through the cold. Tonight the bowl is simple. Soon the board will sing. Between them lies the work that hid in winter, the jobs you do when fields sleep and hunger waits for sloppy planning. The bell fades, the oven breathes. Tomorrow we open the barn doors and count the winter labors waiting in the dim. Winter looks still from far away. Up close it hums. When fields sleep under rime, hands don't. The village turns inward to tasks that rarely enter manuscripts, quiet arts that keep spring from arriving to a broken house and an empty bin. They happen in doorways, lofts, lean-tos, and the barn aisle where breath shows in pale clouds. Begin with threshing, because bread begins there. Flails move in paired cadence, right strikes, left lifts, left strikes, right lifts, husks leap, chaff drifts, kernels drum into baskets, music with maths inside it. Threshing is winter work by logic. Dry roofs, spare hours, fewer field demands. A small crew can make a long morning answer to a week of loaves. Winnowing follows when the air is honest. A door opens to a chosen wind. Grain pours from shoulder height. The draft sorts the mix. Chaff sails, light seeds wander, heavy kernels fall. Little by little, gravity and patience make certainty. Children learn to stand out of the stream and to read the floor where avalanches revealed the barn's crooked heart. At the bench iron and wood reconcile. The smith's winter is steady hinge pins, share points, axe edges, sickle teeth. Sparks jump. The smell promises tools that won't fail at the first furrow. The carpenter trues a rim with a spokeshave whisper like snow under boots. Repair doesn't brag, it removes future crises. Textiles take the best light. Spinning never stops, because clothes are time stored as thread. Distaff tucked as spinner draws fiber, twists, wins, filling a spindle that sinks softly. Weaving grows when warps are dressed. Winter sees cloth advance toward shirts, hose, and bed linens that steal less heat. Fulling beats finished cloth in water, thickening it into weather you can wear. Leather keeps rain out and cold polite. Winter mends bring soles back from the edge. Risu seams rubbed blunt by lanes. Set hobnails neat as beads. A cobbler listens to feet, where they load, where they split, where they burn. Gloves, belts, harness, and scabbards, drink oil and hand heat, turning from stiff to serviceable by slow use. Fuel never stands idle. Hedge laying makes living fences tight and stock-proof. Stems cut and half-bent, woven into a thorny wall that wakes in spring already useful. Faggots are tied for ovens, billets stacked bark down so rain sheds, not drinks. In peat country, last summer's cuts are checked. What crumbles burns first, what clinks waits for the cruelest mornings. Kitchens are workshops by another name. The mortar thuds garlic and salt, or crushes dried herbs whose smell is a slipped ribbon of July. Knives, stropped, bowls, scraped. A broken spoon becomes a smaller spoon and keeps its seat. Even ash works, sifted for scouring, leached into lye for washing, saved for soap when fat and patience coincide. Barns have weather inside. Roofs drip if you let them. Floors turn treacherous if you don't. Winter chores sweep, fork and bank bedding, deep so beasts lie dry. Fodder is measured with a discipline more tender than strict. Salt licks keep appetites honest. A curricombe steadies coats, calves and kids arrive when they choose. Hands learn the warmth and worry of births that won't wait. Lanes ask for tending. Ditches clog when no one speaks for them. Then the first thaw speaks too loudly. Men and boys cut water a path and throw straw on ice. Paths hold villages together. A kept lane is fellowship with a handle on it. Markets don't vanish. They move earlier and speak briskly. Eggs, onions, a twist of wool, a rope of eels, a pot repaired, a story traded. Often winter settles in kind, labor credited, favors noted, debts carried like baskets to be set down when lambing's done. Reputation is winter's coin, payable forward, collectible later. Winter is also school. Proverbs arrive one per chore. Mend the roof while the moon is sharp. Beware the plank that doesn't creak. Ash before oak. The hearth will choke. They are mnemonics for physics and patience. Children learn the house's alphabet. Heat, sharpness, dryness, order. None of this is heroic the way paintings prefer. It is maintenance, the art that prevents tragedy from needing a name. Prevented disasters don't get saints' days, they get a nod and a better sleep. Winter work is the practice of spring. By the time the first furrow shines black and hopeful, the village has already earned it with hours that left no swagger and little song. Listen as tools are put away. The rasp laid flat. The mallet head dried from the hearth. Flails hung where weather cannot find them. The spindle tucked. The broom stood on its bristles. The room ends the day as a careful reader ends a chapter. Marker placed true, ready to begin again. The oven's mouth glows. The lane is quiet. The barn exhales. Tomorrow we step closer to the body what people wore when the wind asked sharp questions, and how cloth, leather, and habit turned cold into something negotiable. The oven is dim and steady. Lay the tools down, fetch the wool. We dress for the weather now. Cold questions the body before it questions the roof. Winter's first argument is with skin, breath, and joints. So peasants answered with layers that worked like small architectures. No modern fabrics, only physics and linen and wool, leather and wood, habit and hope. Layering wasn't fashion, it was engineering you could tie and walk inside. Start at the base. Linen sits against the skin because it drinks sweat and dries fast by the hearth. A clean shirt makes coarse wool kinder and keeps warmth portable. Strip outer layers for hard work without soaking what must stay warm later. Women wore shifts, men long shirts, both cinched cloth with a belt so still air could live between layers, the cheapest insulation. Wool is winter's hero because it forgives damp. It insulates when wet and learns the wearer's shape. Gowns and kirtles cut wind. Hose hug legs. Stitched footings stop drafts at the ankle. Add a surcoat and a scattered wardrobe becomes a system. If a sleeve frays, you darn. If darning fails, you piece. If piecing fails, the cloth binds another seam. Hoods are punctuation. They warm the head and guard the neck, where heat flees fastest. A liripipe can wrap like a scarf or tie under the chin. Where weather is wet, linings matter. Where cold is deep, one who nests inside another. People who must listen for the world keep one ear loose by habit. Hands argue with cold because hands have work. Mittens win more often than gloves. Fingers huddle and share heat. A cord through both sleeves keeps a child's mittens attached. Work that needs fingertips uses half mitts or turn-back cuffs. Afterward, wool drinks sweat and returns warmth. Leather over wool, when possible, seals the bargain. Feet decide morale. Hose with separate footings hug calves. Where soles are thin, a second pair or rags at the ankle change a day. Leather shoes are fed with tallow or oil. Where roads consume leather, wooden patterns lift a traveler above mud and thaw. In marsh districts, clogs with pegged soles keep feet honest. Socks are rare, felt insoles and straw do quiet work. Cloaks are portable rooms. A half circle of well-filled wool can turn sleet into inconvenience. Pinned at the shoulder, a cloak becomes windward wall and leeward tent at once. It shelters a child, a loaf, a newborn kid. At night it folds into bedding. By day it proves hospitality. Sharing a cloak edge is as kind as sharing a cup by the fire. Belts and laces matter. A belt carries knife pouch. Sometimes a small cheese calories worn like a talisman. Laces let garments shift through seasons and bodies. The same kirtle can belong to a growing girl, a nursing mother, and an ant with a stick. Sewing is editing. Keep the sense, adjust the margins, tell the story again. Color also works. Browns, grays, creams, and woad green mix with feast day flashes. Madder red, weld yellow, a blot of imported blue. Dark cloth forgives smoke. Light cloth proves Sunday cleanliness. Woven bands at cuffs and hems strengthen wear points like an extra row of stitching. Wet is winter's sly tactic. Drying has a schedule. Boots are stuffed with straw and set near, not on the fire. Hose hang where draft and heat agree. Wool is brushed, not baked. If snow arrives, laws invert. Knock it off quickly. Keep fabric breathing. Harvest free water later. Smell is part of the wardrobe. Smoke clings, tallow speaks, damp argues. People answer with herbs in rafters, and in sachets lavender where it grows, thyme, savory, mint. Clean is the absence of trouble. In winter, a shirt changed and aired often is a civic contribution. Status shows, within reason. Fur linings add warmth and rank. A well-dyed hood says good year, yet practicality outranks glitter. The woman whose cloak sheds rain like thatch earns more envy than sleeves that drink puddles. A lord may shimmer at Christmas, but the cotter with dry feet in February wins the wager that matters. Clothes teach posture. Layers ask you to move economically. Bend from the hips. Keep the core warm. Hold tools close. They whisper advice. Tie your hood before the lane turns. Bank heat before the bell ends work. Carry your cloak like a wall when the wind rounds the churchyard corner. Children learn the catechism of warmth and remember the psalm. Dry feet, full heart. Dressing is a vote for survival cast before dawn. After the vote, labor begins. Garments earn their keep by turning breath into weather and sweat into steam. At evening, layers come off in reverse. Steam hangs, then vanishes. Linen dries. Will forgives. Leather waits for oil. The body thanks the clothes by mending them tomorrow. The lamplight thins. Lay the mittens on the hearthstone, the pattens by the door, the cloak over the footboard. Feel the room soften as the house returns your heat. We have dressed against the air, now we light it. Rushlights and tallow will teach the night to speak softly. Hood off, breath easy, strike the flint. We light the room, not the field. Night asks different questions than cold. Darkness is not only a lack, that is a presence that touches corners and then the mind. Peasants answered with small, stubborn lights and a choreography that turned shadows into furniture. The aim was not to dazzle a room, but to make tasks possible, keep spirits orderly, and spend as little fat or coin as winter allowed. Begin with rushlets in summer. Children cut common rushes, peeled the green from the white pith, and dried the strips like pale ribbons. In winter, that pith drank melted tallow or bacon grease and became a fragile, useful wick. A rushlight burns quickly. It flares, dims, flares again, teaching a pace to work. You mend a hem, read a psalm you already know, find a dropped pin, mind a pot, hold it wrong and it drips. Place it well and it answers an hour like an honest tool. Tallow candles are steadier, pricier, and smell of their source. Household tallow comes from Martimus renderings. You save it because every candle is stored daylight. Dipped or molded, wicked with twisted fiber, a tallow candle lays down a stronger pool of light that lets ink behave and thread obey. It smokes if jealous of draught and gutters if neglected. Trim the wick with a nail or snuffers. Shield it at the door. Count the inches left like money. Beeswax is gentler on the nose and kinder to walls, but rare where hives are few. Church and manor see more wax than cottages do. When a wax taper visits a poorhouse at childbirth, a wedding, a sickbed, the room looks briefly wealthy, as if the day agreed to stay up late. Lamps endure too. Shallow bowls whose lips feed a wick from fat or oil when any oil can be spared. In river towns or by the sea, fish oil adds its voice. Olive oil belongs far south and in books to northern ears. A lamp placed low makes hands careful and faces close. Eyes adjust to economies. The fire, the oven's mouth, the coals under ash, these are not only heat, they are lights with names and habits. The hearth throws light up. The oven throws light forward. Coals plate the underside of pots with copper. A cook stands where the spoon reads the surface without steam blinding judgment. A spinner shifts her stool to keep thread inside the small star her candle makes. Rooms develop orbits. The best chair migrates with the season, nearer the oven in wind, nearer the door when steam argues. The Bible or service book rests where evening light lays faithfully. The mending basket waits in half shadow so needles won't drop into dark. Children are posted as runners to turn pages, fetch a coal, or mind a latch when a gust tries theft. Smoke is a roommate and a negotiator. It leaves slowly, painting beams, sealing thatch, making rafters dull to pests, but it complains if vents are wrong or fuel is green. The language of smoke is winter literacy. Pale and thin is content. Thick and brown is insult. A backdraft scolds technique. The cure is patience. Drier fuel. Better banking. A looser door for a moment. The pot hook raised an inch. Night management goes beyond light. Sound must be polite. Hinges greased. Latches fitted. Tools nested where feet won't find them. Bedtime is tiered. The youngest first, then workers, then the pair who mind embers. A low story wraps the room in one sentence. Listening together is cheaper than more candle. The village owns the dark in common. Windows trade hints of flame across lanes. The alehouse glows long on feast eves but short on fasts. In sickness, neighbors notice the light that refuses sleep and bring broth or offer hours. In storm, a candle in a tiny window faces the road like a small lighthouse. The path is cruel, but this door knows your name. Travel after sunset is avoided when it can be arranged when it can't. A horn lantern guards flame from wind and teaches feet to choose the honest middle of the lane. Stars matter more than schedules. Moonlight promotes errands. Footsteps learn the grammar of ruts and stones. Dogs tell you who you are within 3 houses by scent alone. Economy has manners. One candle becomes 2 when a needle meets fine linen, to become 1 again when the seam is done. Children learn to love flame without touching it and to say goodnight with a breath that neither spits nor begs. Polished metal or even a dish of water doubles a flame. The goal is not brightness. It is sufficiency with grace. Night concludes in ritual. Embers are hived under ash. A last pot moves to the hearth's back. The small lamp kisses dark. The bar settles. Someone checks the sky through the shutter crack and forecasts in peasant words, stars hard as nails. Wind like washing, frost writing its name. Someone else listens to cattle shift, a dog sigh, the house exhale. With light made calm and the room arranged for sleep, breath slows and talk thins. Tomorrow brings different work, but the grammar of evening repeats. Fuel measured, wicks trimmed, a little brightness borrowed and paid back in care. Winter nights do not bully where people keep company with the small sciences of flame. The candle is low and steady. Bank the coals. Tomorrow we face the hard question that can end the music. What happens when the year goes wrong and winter stops negotiating? Most winters were strict but negotiable. Then came years that refused to bargain. Between 1315 and 1317 much of northern Europe met a season within seasons that broke the ordinary grammar of survival. It began as renordinary at first, then unreasonable. Sowing windows closed half-finished. Seed rotted in cold soils. Hayfields drowned. A wet summer is not only a wetter shirt. It is missing fodder in January and thin milk in March. The year tripped, and the years after fell over it. Grain is the hinge of peasant life, and the hinge stuck. Rye and wheat failed widely. Barley sulked. Oats looked hardy and then disappointed under relentless cloud. Prices climbed, then ran. Markets became theater. Carts arrived late or light. Measures were watched like defendants, and small frauds tried to masquerade as miracles. Seed grain sacred because it is tomorrow was eaten in many places because there was no clean later to keep. Once that threshold is crossed, recovery needs more than a dry week. It needs time. A hungry household cannot lend. Fodder failed as surely as bread. When haystacks are small, animals leave the ledger and enter the larder too soon. Cattle went thin. Disease found easy doors. Herds shrank, and with them the next year's strength in milk and traction. Pigs, the peasants' flexible savings, moved early to barrel. Goats were pressed until their useful stubbornness turned to silence. A village that spends its herd in winter pays in spring with weaker plow teams and shallower furrows. The famine did not only empty bowls, it unstitched capacity. Salt, winter's quiet ally, turned fickle. Rain-swollen roads slowed the barrels. Coastal works failed to dry brine efficiently. Forests already cut close for fuel could not support extravagant smoking. Meat that might have carried a month gave up days too early. Fish trade stumbled under storms that mocked small boats and under prices that mocked small purses. Herring, stockfish and eels still reached inland, but not in the forgiving amounts that turned gray weeks into bearable ones. The cellars' math stopped adding. Authorities tried the tools they knew: alms, price caps, exhortations. Some towns opened stores, some lords loosened dues. Some merchants were pressed to sell at reasonable rates while facing unreasonable supply. A ceiling cannot command a sky to clear. Courts busy with grain offenses also saw other pressures. Theft from fields, woodlands cut to hard vagrancy that looked like weary migration. Where custom once answered hunger, custom now had no surplus to spend. Chroniclers wrote in the language of astonishment because the ordinary words for rain and hunger felt insufficient. They counted burials with ink that seemed to widen on the page. They told of parents bargaining in tears, of travelers fallen in ditches, of villages that looked older in a week. Some reported horror stories of people pushed past lines they themselves could not imagine crossing. Here, we move carefully. Rumor multiplies in disaster. Such tales may signal scale and fear more than common practice. Even without them, the record is plain enough. Many were cold, many were hungry, many died. The famine's cruelty was how it repeated. A single bad year a prudent village can survive, to teach humility. 3 in some districts taught despair. Seed eaten becomes a smaller harvest even if weather improves. Smaller herds mean fewer calves. Fewer calves mean weaker teams. Weaker teams mean late plowing. Late plowing means the calendar loses its footing again. People who endure a first blow tired meet the second with less to give. Illness finds some colds that become killers, fevers that find thin children and win. We do not need morbid enumeration to understand the curve. When food thins, resistance thins. Yet even within loss, the old scaffolding tried to hold parish alms chests emptied and filled again. Brotherhoods and guilds extended credit in bread, not coin. Women traded hours at hearths and bedsteads. Men traded hours with hedges and roofs. Priests scolded hoarders and consoled the confessing. A good Lord's Hall became a memory people praised for decades. A mean one became a proverb children sharpened. Hospitality, which in fair weather looks like decoration, revealed itself as public works. Not all regions suffered equally. The famine's map followed climate and trade lines. The North Sea world, the Low Countries, England, northern France, parts of Germany and Scandinavia endured harder. Some Mediterranean zones knew hardship but kept more paths open to grain from elsewhere. Even within a country, river towns that could still receive barges fared better than upland parishes cut off by mire. Geography is destiny in slow years. In bad years it shouts. The famine also taught lessons that stayed. People remembered to diversify where they could. More barley here, more peas there, more attention to drainage ditches and to grain varieties that suffer insult without surrender. Commons rules, sometimes lazy in good decades, tightened around woodland and grazing so that the next crisis would find more held in reserve. Some manors tinkered with dues to keep tenants from disappearing. The story bent away from catastrophe as best it could. We should resist one easy narrative, that this famine directly caused everything that followed. History dislikes straight lines. But after 1317, many communities were poorer, smaller, and more brittle. When other shocks came, the odd year of cattle murrain, a failed vintage war cloud on horizon, they found people with less cushion. And decades later, when a different dark rider approached, the memory of rain-soaked hunger still lived in how people heard hoofbeats. Stand again in the winter room, we know the one, with the rushlight, the stew, the low door. Imagine that the barrel we counted on is half what it should be, that the bread smells a little thin, that the child's cough lingers, that the cow in the byre rises slower than she did in autumn. The small sciences of survival still work. Banking coals, mending latches, drying boots. But the sums cannot be forced. The house's engineering buys time. Time refuses to sell. When the sky behaves, the peasant system looks like wisdom. When the sky misbehaves long enough, wisdom needs allies it does not own. Drier summers, kinder winds, roads that hold markets that can fetch relief. And so people turned not only to barns and to neighbors but to the weather itself, to ward pattern, rumor and memory, asking if something deeper had shifted in the air. The stew is quiet. The bell will still ring. Before we sleep, We step back from a single disaster and look at the larger sky, at the centuries, mood, and the argument about whether warmth had been leaving the room all along. When people in winter rooms looked up from smoke and soup, they looked into weather that seemed personal. The sky behaved like a neighbor, familiar, moody, sometimes generous, sometimes not speaking at all. Yet over centuries it had longer habit swings that no single village could read, but that left fingerprints on chronicles. Tree rings, harvest dates, wine yields, and the stories elders used to measure back when. Today we give names to those long moods. Then people gave them proverbs. Scholars speak of a medieval warm period roughly bridging the 10th to early 14th centuries in parts of Europe and the North Atlantic world. The phrase can mislead. It does not mean sunny picnics across all lands for 400 years. It means a tilt of averages in many regions toward kinder, growing seasons, longer summers, in some places milder winters, in others enough to lift grain lines uphill, stretch vineyards north, and make marginal soils behave as if they had been forgiven. Monasteries noted grape years that felt bold. Icelandic settlers wrote of grazing and wood where later ages found ice and scrub. Timberline crept. Hay barns dared thinner margins. But warmth was not uniform, and neither was time. The Mediterranean told a different story than the Baltic. The Atlantic facade, another than the interior. Warm also meant caprice. More intense downpours for some, sudden drought for others, winds that found new games. In short, a favorable average still held cruel arrivals. A peasant, hearing a scholar speak, would say, "We had good years, we had bad years, but there were stretches when good years came a little more often, and thin years recovered faster." Around the 14th century, many records begin to darken. Not everywhere at once, not to the same degree, and not in a tidy line. Yet signs of a broad cooling and heightened variability, what later writers dubbed the start of the Little Ice Age, appear in tax rolls, parish accounts, and letters that complain in weary prose. Frost fairs would one day skate the Thames, but even before spectacle, the pattern bent. Later springs, wetter summers, untimely storms. The Great Famine of 1315 to 17 did not prove a continental climate shift by itself. It lived inside a larger argument the atmosphere had started. What does a cooler, fussier climate mean on a table? It shortens betting windows. Spring sowings jam into narrow weeks between frost and deluge. Harvests risk a green kernel or a black one, with less of the patient, dry interval grain begs for hay. The quiet empire that rules winter animals spoils if June sulks. Grapes turn shy, apples complain. Salt pans lose days to cold winds, and fishers lose weeks to seas that won't negotiate. Every arithmetic in the house starts carrying an extra just in case, and just in case is expensive in time and wood and nerve. Villages adapted in the ways they could afford. Some shifted balance among grains. More hardy rye where wheat sulked. More barley where brewing steadied nerves and calories alike. More beans and peas to hedge protein when herds shrank. Drainage ditches deepened. Field ridges sharpened. Commons rules tightened on wood so that fuel would meet the long waits between dry spells. Seed choice, once custom more than calculation, became an art of small gambles. Folk memory lengthened. Elders recalled the last early frost, the season when candles were used at noon, the year a thaw lied and broke plows and sucking ground. Architecture listened to, thatch thickened. Doors shrank another finger's breadth. Loom rooms moved inward. Clay ovens received repairs in the first light of any sunny morning, as if the weather were a creditor who might arrive unscheduled and fuss about cracks. Even clothing remembered. Fuller cloaks, closer hose, hoods that claimed more neck, patterns pegged with a certainty that lanes would make a meal of leather. None of this happened under banners. No herald announced the warm period ends. The change felt like a personality shift in someone you live with. Harder to predict, quicker to sulk. Honest work still answered, just less reliably. Some regions kept their bargain longer. Wine still climbed stony French slopes. Olives still blessed Mediterranean farms. Elsewhere, edges frayed. An upland parish that once grew reliable, Maslin, found itself forced toward rye and rumour. Marsh parishes fought water with spade and oath. River towns, with trade as insurance, fared better than hill hamlets with only barrels and prayer. Debate remains today because evidence is noisy. A tree ring narrows for drought and for cold. A chronicler dramatizes and undercounts. A vineyard's success depends on hands as well as heat. but when you lay the clues together, the Paul and the planks of old peers, the ledgers that list grain at prices that make bishops write in the margins, the curve suggests a chill mood settling in, then wobbling, then deepening in later centuries. Warm and cold are easy words for a messy truth. Variability grew teeth. For peasants, climate was never theory. It was the difference between a child learning a song after supper or sleeping early because the room wanted silence. It was whether Candlemas candles felt symbolic or necessary. It was whether a fast day trained the larder or punished it. The genius of village life lay in treating weather as a partner to negotiate with daily, while accepting that, over generations, the partner might change its terms. And still, even in stern winters, the calendar offered harbors. From Martinmas to Candlemas, the year stitched warmth and meaning through feasts, blessings, and licensed joy. If climate is the paragraph, festivals are the punctuation that lets human breath find its place. The wind knocks once at the shutter and moves on. We followed the river of winter days from slaughter and storage to candles and song, the arc from Martinmas to Candlemas that taught cold months how to glow. From the first cold mornings of November to the first hints of thaw in February, winter in medieval Europe followed a lit path. It could not cancel hardship, but it taught patience and turned survival into a chain of meaningful days. The arc began with Martinmas and ended with Candlemas. Between them, doors opened, ovens blazed, and bells braided prayer to appetite. Martinmas, November 11th, stood where pasture ends and barrow begins. It was the yearly settlement between fodder and mouths, a reckoning that saved the living by sacrificing the excess. Slaughter was logistics made sacred, fat rendered to tallow for candles and soap, blood caught for sausages, skin scraped for shoes, bones saved for broths that would keep January honest. A sudden wealth of fresh meat flickered through the village, then narrowed into salted patience. Where mast had been kind, goose or pig crowned the day. When not, thrift spoke louder and just as reverently. After Martinmas, nights lengthened and liturgy narrowed the bowl. Advent followed a season of edges smoothed by restraint. Fasts did not silence kitchens. They changed their grammar. Fish replaced flesh on more days. Peas and beans shouldered more lines in the pot, and spices where they appeared spoke in low voices. Households trimmed flame and sound. Carols were felt before they were sung. Then Christmas arrived, opening doors like a thaw. In halls bright with greenery and smoke, a lord's largesse gave lessons as stern as any law. A full cask mended resentments, a roasted joint purchased peace. A generous dole at the gate turned rumor kindly for months. In cottages, the echo turned humble materials into celebration. Richer pottages, spiced cakes if fortune allowed, a ribbon of honey brightening a child's bread. Hospitality wore its oldest cotan, extra seat by the fire. A bowl passed without counting. Feasting was not carelessness, it was morale craft. It used wealth to justify strictness later and gave the body a memory to walk toward when January went gray. Gifts were practical and edible, favors counted in loaves and ladles. Plays and mummers wandered lanes, letting villagers laugh at hierarchy for a measured hour and then put it back in place, none the worse for the joke. 12 days carried the glow from Christmas to Epiphany. Time moved differently. Softer at the edges, kinder to songs that wanted a second verse. On 12th night, misrule crowned a fool or a child to remind greatness it lives by consent. Then the calendar, like a kitchen after guests leave, set itself in order, still warm, but tidy. Between Epiphany and Candlemas ran a quiet ribbon of holy days and local customs. Blessings met, tools and fields, plows touched by prayer, barns sprinkled as if to frighten mildew with Latin. In hard winters, such gestures steadied hearts, and, in small ways, habits cleaning corners, checking hinges, mending vents. Children learned that ceremony was not magic, but a schedule disguised as wonder. Candlemas, February 2nd, returned light to hands. Beeswax tapers in church threw a gold that cottages rarely saw. Their blessing drifted home as a rumor of safety. New candles meant courage against long evenings, a promise that winter had turned its back a little. Whether Laura perched on the day like a bird, sun foretold more frost, cloud fewer, an old wish to read the future in a single morning's mood. Food touched each station of the arc. Martinmas tasted of fat and smoke, Advent of peas and patience, Christmas of roast, pastry and ale. The 12 days of music and shed leftovers turned into soups with stories, Candlemas of simple breads and a softened rigor. butter returning where rule had banished it. Children could list the year's flavors the way a clerk lists dues. All these festivals moved with social gravity. They pulled the lonely into rooms, the sullen toward cooperation, the anxious toward a stool by the fire where a neighbor would, without remark, pass a bowl. They legitimized generosity and organized restraint, sending a little heat down lanes where houses had less of it. Eating together became a public work that needed no counsel. The ark also taught time, when to slaughter and when to spare, when to save drippings and when to spend them, when to sing and when to sweep. Children grew up with a calendar they could feel, not just hear from the nave. If climate or markets went sour, the ritual spine held the season upright enough for spring to gather itself. Stand again in the peasant house, late in January. The rushlight is low. A Candlemas taper waits in the chest, wrapped against mice and chance. The door knows the difference between a kind frost and a cruel one. The pot on the trammel has more peas than pork but smells brave. Tomorrow the church will shine like a small sun, and even the skeptical will squint and forgive a little. Festivals end. Obligations resume. Rents must be reckoned, corvée tallied, wood rights and gleaning spelled out before hunger writes its own law. After the candles, we count the dues. Winter did not pause obligation. If festivals stitched light across the dark, the manor stitched rules. A peasant household belonged to a web of custom where survival and authority bargained every week. The court baron met in a timber-bird room or beneath a linden if weather allowed. In winter it met inside, steam rising from damp cloaks, hands chafed, eyes on tallies. Their memory had a clerk. Rights were said aloud so they would not thin. Dues were read so they would not grow fat by accident. Rents in kind mattered first. Grain rendered after harvest counted again in winter, sack by sack, measure by measure. A fair lord used a bushel that kept its brim. A greedy one used a heaped measure going in and a level measure coming out. Villagers knew the difference with the details ferocity. Eggs, hens, and sometimes a pig joined the grain. Where vineyards survived must appeared, where orchards held, a render of cider or perry. The purpose properly told was mutual endurance. The lord's barn became insurance for dearth. The tenant's thankless labor on domain land, a fee for that umbrella in bad weather. Labor dues corvée shifted when fields slept. A man who owed days on the lord's plow team instead cut and hauled timber for bridge repairs, cleared ditches, mended palings, carted stone for a granary wall. Women brewed for hall feasts, washed hall linens, spun hall thread. The work looked like village work with better tools, worse pay, and a steward counting. Winter corvée could be lighter in truly hard seasons, if only because lords did not wish to break the machine that fed them. Letting tenants keep more time for their own barns counted as prudence disguised as benevolence. Custom guarded peasants from ruin and lords from revolt. Gleaning rights stayed even after harvesting late in the year when weather returned a field to walkable. Pannage in the lord's woods fattened pigs en masse. Fuel rights allowed deadwood and brush to be taken within strict bounds, transgression cutting young growth, taking a live branch fetched to find that stung, and a sermon that echoed, yet those rights were the thin threads that kept cottages warm and bowls wider than rumor. When a steward tightened them unfairly, winter noticed immediately. Fees nested within fees. A mill right meant grain was ground at the lord's mill for a proportion of flour. The miller's toll watched like a thief and defended like a cousin. An oven right meant baking at the lord's oven when one existed, fuel saved and schedule shared, with dues gathered in crust and coin. A bridge due kept roads from drowning. A ferry due kept trade from freezing. Each right looked like a restriction and functioned like infrastructure. Without such centralized tools, wood would vanish faster, floods would speak louder, and fuel would burn frivolously. The manor court performed memory. It witnessed transfers of strips and cottages within open field systems, recorded marriages and the fines that accompanied the paperwork of ordinary life, and registered alehouse licenses so winter nights would be lively but not ungoverned. It punished the small crimes winter invited, a theft of turnips, a poached rabbit, a hedge cut too eagerly. It also mediated quarrels whose cow strayed, whose ditch sent water across a boundary, whose sons brawled on a fast day. Better to settle before Lent than after. Status threaded obligation. Free tenants paid in coin or negotiated service downward to a fraction. Villains paid in labor and in the humility the records demanded. with head uncovered, a phrase that reads colder than it felt. Customs costume rather than humiliation's lash. Cotters with little land, traded days for rights, lived closer to hunger, and knew the clerk's handwriting better than they liked. The manor depended on all three and pretended otherwise only at feasts. Alms were not decoration. A lord judged generous at Christmas and on certain saints' days banked loyalty to spend in lean months. A stingy hole saved coin and paid in unrest. In famine years, barns opened by law and by calculation. Feeding 100 mouths thinly now avoided a village emptying later. The steely arithmetic of benevolence was a winter craft as real as ditching. Coin threaded through kind. Taxes due upward tallage in some periods arrived like weather, seldom fair and never negotiated at the cottage door. A good reeve argued totals downward at the hall, then outward to the village with a show of reluctant duty. A bad reeve made enemies carefully and often. Between them, the parish priest preached conscience to both sides and passed a basket a day later. Justice in winter wanted to be quick. Cold made tempers short and travel slow. The court moved faster on disputes that could freeze into feuds. Sworn neighbors, jurors in the plainest sense, spoke for boundaries and character, holding the map of custom in their mouths. Written charters mattered, but winter put more trust in voices that would still be on those lanes when the snow thawed. The open field system itself, strips scattered across great furlongs like threads in a single cloth, made neighbors legible and obligations mutual. No one could farm alone. No one could break rules without tripping a dozen feet later. Paths between ridges existed as much for talk as for traffic. Winter used those paths to carry rumors of fairness or its absence, and rumors are instruments sharper than sun. If all this sounds like government by habit, that is the point. Habit administered heat, bread, and quiet. The manor's letter of law mattered, but its survival value lay in not startling the people who fed it. A lord who learned that lesson kept tenants in sleep. One who did not found himself rich in parchment and poor in plows. At the hearth, the peasant counted dues with calm hands. 3 days to the lord next week. 1 hen at Candlemas, the miller's toll on Thursday, a hope that the steward's measure would be honest. Then the spoon returned to the bowl, the hood was tied, and work went on. Obligation did not feed a child, but the roads and ovens it maintained helped that child meet spring. Shut the manor hall's door against the draught. We leave parchment and return to the kitchen. Esteem to the medicines and charms that winter households kept when laws had no advice at all. When cold presses and the doctor lives 3 parishes away, households become clinics, chapels, and small theaters of hope. Remedies travel by memory, a mother's hands teaching a daughter how to steep, cool, bind, and wait. Priests bless. Midwives bargain with pain in tones that sound like prayer but act like science. The border between the two is porous, and in winter, porous things keep you alive. Start with the cupboard. Honey waits like summer in a pot. It soothes throats, coaxes appetite, and makes bitter things gentle. Vinegar stands beside it, a sharp grammar that cleans, wakes, and sometimes scares stubborn smells into leaving. Garlic and onions, chopped and salted, become small soldiers against foul air. Herbs hang in sheaves from rafters. Thyme for a chest that whistles, sage for a mouth that won't behave, mint to settle an argument between belly and bread. Most doses are kitchen-sized, a spoon, a pinch, a draught, no stronger than a story. Heat is medicine. A stone warmed in ash and wrapped answers a joint that protests like old timber. A linen rag dipped in hot ale and laid on a temple argues with headaches better than philosophy. Steam under a cloth bowl clears a face when rhyme has moved indoors. Beds are drawn tighter. Drafts are taught manners. Breath is coaxed to move in deeper, steadier sentences. The body is a house of rooms closed, the doors warm, the central hall. Poultices look like cooking gone sideways. Mustard ground to a paste stings life into cold fingers. Onion poultices convince a cough to surrender its grip. Mashed turnip under a cloth pleads with stubborn swellings. Fat, when there is some, carries herbs into skin like a trusted messenger, and beeswax seals the bargain. Bruises learn the color of patience under arnica or comfrey where known. Sprains answer to binding in time. The rule is simple: don't force what should bend back on its own. Charms coexist with compresses. A child's fever meets cool cloths and a whispered verse. A scald receives clean water, a calm hand, and a cross traced once less to summon thunder than to steady everyone in the room while the pain decides. Folk words hang around remedies like warm breath. They mark the moment we become careful. Even skeptics keep one in their pocket because winter is long and men are not made only of reason. The house itself wears amulets of habit. An iron knife planted in the lintel says the threshold is awake. A red thread on a cradle announces that love is on watch. A sprig of rowan or juniper at the door asks trouble to pick another lane. Bread blessed at a feast day lends a corner to sickness, because sharing sacred food with pain is older than any local priest. Salt lines drawn at the hearth step look like cleaning. They are also treaties with comfort. Taboo is a practical poetry. Don't whistle indoors or call the wind into the house. Don't sweep after sundown or you'll throw warmth away. Don't sit on the table lest the table forget its duty to feed. Don't count loaves aloud or the year will count your losses. Don't tell a dream before breakfast or the day will take it back harsher. These are not laws. They are stories. The village tells the body so it behaves kindly toward its luck. Weather has its parish customs. Turn your boots to the door and snow will think you've already left. Hang a spoon on the latch and the frost will look at itself and go away. Place a basin of water on a night of fear. Ice patterns in the morning speak the sky's dialect. Ring a small bell when fog presses a sound to remind the lane to stay a lane. A lantern in the window is a lighthouse for late neighbors and for your own worry, which otherwise wanders fields by itself. Midwives are winter's engineers of mercy. They know timing like farmers know rain. When to wait, when to call, when to heat water, when to fetch a neighbor with quicker fingers. They keep kits of linen, cord, needle, salve. They keep phrases that make rooms breathe again. Their remedies are precise. Sitz baths stitched from herbs, warmed swaddles, a cup of broth that counts as medicine and diplomacy at once. Their taboos are sharper. No loud speaking as the child crowns. No slamming doors. No arguing in a room where breath is apprenticing. Every rule has a measurable purpose. Keep warmth, keep rhythm, keep courage. The priest walks a parallel road. He blesses candles at Candlemas, chalks doorways at Epiphany, sprinkles barns to frighten mold, prays over beds, and carries a small vial that means as much to fear as it does to faith. He warns against sorcery and also knows which wise woman keeps a list of herbs longer than his homily. Behind closed doors, he asks her advice about his own cough. Rumor is its own medicine, bitter and sometimes useful. This herb cured a reeve in Hogtide that saint's bone stopped a swelling. A new root from a traveling peddler behaves like fire or like foolishness depending on the moon. Winter sharpens repetition. A lie can wrap itself in wool and sit by the fire for months. Yet a rumor about a useful plant or a kinder midwife can cross 3 parishes by Sunday and spare a future grief. The village sifts with its own sieve. Households draft their own statutes of caution. Do not warm cider in the good pot that takes fat. The smell clings for a week. Do not sleep with wet hair by the oven mouth. It promises nothing but a fever. Do not hide sickness from neighbors. You'll need their ovens when yours breaks. They'll need your ditch tools when there's freeze. Tidiness is preventive law. Hang cloaks where steam can reach them. Dry hose upside down. Set wooden spoons across lids to still rattling. Bank ash until coals become negotiable at dawn. Wolves and worries prowl at the edges. Doors know the sound of both. A knife under a pillow is less a weapon than a prayer for safe dreams. A small icon or painted cross near the bed teaches night to mind its manners. Children are taught to name fears out loud once, then to accept a task. Hold this candle. Fetch that cloth. Count to 50 while I stir. Action shrinks shadows. None of this sat neatly inside learned medicine, and none of it lay entirely outside. A monastery leech book might list the same time a shepherd's wife picks. A scholar might frown at the knife in a lintel and then praise the way the same household keeps water clean and air moving. Winter collapses categories. It asks, did the room warm? Did the breath slow? Did the cough loosen? Did the household stay friends? Remedies that pass those questions survive longer than fashions. Still, houses breathe smoke as much as stories. The next subject knows both cure and complaint. How smoke was managed when chimneys were rumor, vents were craft, and rafters learned to speak. Bank the little fears. We climb toward the roof now and follow the smoke to its narrow doors. Smoke was a roommate in medieval houses, not a guest. It stained beams the color of tea, sealed thatch against sparks, kept insects shy, and made eyes negotiate tears. People did not love smoke. They learned its grammar. A good hearth was a set of habits taught like prayers and tuned like tools. Before chimneys became common for ordinary roofs, control depended on geometry, fuel, wine reading, and patience. Begin with the hearth. In most small houses, the fire sat low on a clay or stone bed, ringed by cobbles that remembered where pots should rest. An iron trammel or pothook hung from a beam, raising or lowering kettles so cooks aimed at heat rather than forcing heat to aim at them. Tall flames were pretty and disobedient. A low, wide bed of embers gave steady cooking and a calmer smoke that would climb. Banking the fire with ash at night made a slow heart that woke quickly at dawn. Above, there was usually no masonry stake, only open structure. Louvers in the roof, or a small timber smoke lantern promised a way out. They were poles and cord technology, cracked in still weather, opened wide during steamy stews, pinched tight in gales so warmth would not flee. Where no louver existed, the ridge leaked by design. Fuel was physics and politics. Green wood hissed and sulked, laying down sour smoke. Dry oak and ash burned with patient gravity. Birch caught fast, helpful at dawn and treacherous in draught. Peat breathed dense and slow, a different temperament under rafters. Households learned blends like brewers. Quick twigs to start, billets for the long middle, peat or hardwood at the end to hold the night. Air needed paths. A door opened a finger width could turn mutiny into draw. A shutter cracked for a minute persuaded a lazy column to stand and go. People read smoke like a letter. Blue and thin meant contentment. Brown and rolling meant wet fuel. Smoke that returned along the roofline like a scold meant the wind had changed or the louver refused its duty. Why did chimneys arrive late for peasants? Cost, craft, and trade-offs. A proper stack wanted stone or brick, a mason, and a hole cut into a roof that already worked. Open holes, meanwhile, offered benefits. Chimneys forgot to brag about smoke-bleached timbers that lasted longer. Meat and herbs cured among the rafters. A broad democratic warmth. In harsh winters, the burden of smoke became insulation. Eyes watered. Houses endured. Chimneys crept in as rooms subdivided. When a ceiling went up to form chambers above, the generous height that once hosted smoke vanished. A flue became necessary. Early answers varied by region. Timber and orb smoke hoods funneled toward a vent. Squat stone stacks hugged gables. Later, wide walk-in fireplaces turned the hearth into a little room. Sparks were tamed. Drafts schooled. Cooking gained new geometries with side ovens and cranes. Change moved unevenly. Within one parish, a grandfather remembered a central hearth under a smoke lantern. The father cooked beneath a timber hood in a corner. The son mortared a stubby stack. Cottages kept what climate and purse allowed. Chimneys brought chores. Soot that once polished rafters now hid in flues. Tar learned corners. Sweeping became a winter business. A boy with a brush of thorn. A rope, a bargain at the door. A cough at noon. A safe at night. Hearth irons multiplied. Grates to cradle coal where coal could be bought. Fire dogs to lift logs so they breathed. Dampers to throttle draw. Trivets for the pots that preferred patience. The grammar of fire acquired punctuation marks. Health shifted. Rooms with decent flues stung eyes less. Fabrics lost their permanent perfume of winter. Walls brightened, yet a focused fireplace concentrated heat into a place rather than an atmosphere. Families rearranged evenings, one chair closer, one story shorter, when comfort felt tidier but smaller. And in poor stacks with bad draft, a new danger arrived. Fumes that complained quietly, headaches with no poetry, sleep that came too quickly. The old nuisance at least shouted. Even without chimneys, households mitigated smoke with engineering by habit. Fire dogs or a backlog lifted fuel so air could climb. Cooking happened in stages to prevent fat from startling flame. Lids sat half off to spare boilovers from performing. Children learned to walk low beneath the ceiling haze, to mind sparks as if they were gossip, small, hot, quick to multiply, ruinous if believed. Stand in an open hall on a windy afternoon. The louver ticks, the door hums, the fire folds and opens like a red flower. Bacon in the rafters prints slow signatures. Onions dry along a beam, moons with skins. Smoke writes a thin line along the roof, and then, as if remembering a promise, loosens skyward. We have followed smoke through beams and weather. Now we turn from structure to sleep, from the air's language to beds, bedding, and the quiet tricks bodies use to keep their own weather through the longest nights. Sleep is winter's second fire. When the door is barred and the rushlight fades, a bed becomes a small climate with rules of its own. Poor or prosperous households engineered the night with rope, straw, feathers where fortune smiled, wool, linen, and habit. The art was exact. Trap breath, slow loss, wake with less to fix, begin with the frame. The common bed stood on legs high enough to dodge damp and invite air underneath. Ropes crisscrossed the frame and tightened with a bed key. Sleep tight is no poet's whim. A mattress lay atop straw or chaff in a coarse linen tick. Rhythm kept it alive. Shaken on market eve, restuffed at quarter days, emptied into byre or midden when spring returned. Where purses were kinder, a feather tick lay above, holding warmth like a quiet bird. Blankets and coverlets turned breath into weather. Wool ruled fold, brushed, forgiving. A heavy coverlet pressed, drafts quiet. A lighter one moved with sleepers so sweat could leave without stealing heat. Bed curtains hung from a canopy or poles, making a tent the room's weather could not freely enter. In a cottage, a cloak added weight. In a hall, fustian or fur bragged and warmed together. Position mattered. Good beds avoided outside walls that argued with frost. Heads turned from shutters. Feet faced the hearth so last heat could stroll upward. In one-room houses, the great bed lived opposite the fire. Truckle beds slid beneath for children or a servant. Infants slept in cradles set where sparks could not visit and drafts could not bully. A cradle rocker's foot learned to sway in time with the pot's simmer. Stones and bottles were winter's conspirators. A river stone, warmed in ash and wrapped, met cold feet like a promise. Earthenware bottles, filled with near-boiling water, warmed a palate before bodies took their places. In deep frost, embers on a shovel kissed the hearthstone near the bed and then returned to safety. Night clothes repeated the day's physics, linen next to skin because linen drinks. Wool above because wool forgives. Caps trapped heat where loss is fastest. Mittens and bed socks were tools, not jokes. In some districts, an oiled cloth across the chest stood against coughs. Science or superstition, it kept drafts from practicing on lungs. Sharing heat was not romance only, it was math. 2 bodies lowered the cost of a night, 3 more so, within the rules of kin and custom. Children paired by age, elders near the warmest league. A guest on a storm night earned a closer place. Dogs kept fewer mice and lent more warmth. Cleanliness had winter grammar. Sheets changed less. Airing mattered more. On still mornings, bedding hung at a shuttered cracked rank. Sharp air and returned fresher. Mattresses were beaten to shift lumps and evict what did not pay rent. Lice were a democracy. Remedies were heat, smoke, combs, and humor. Sleep itself was patterned. Many spoke of first sleep and second sleep, a waking hour between for quiet talk, a cup of small ale, prayer, mending, or romance without haste. Long nights made civilized intermissions. If a child woke coughing, this interval felt made for tending. Privacy was cloth and courtesy. Curtains, screens, and habit drew boundaries where stone could not. Teenagers learned to cough before they moved. The dignity of sleep came from order as much as depth. A bed left tidy at dawn paid interest in the evening. Danger owned an aisle through comfort. Sparks, smoldering peat, low drafts that coaxed smoke into the room, these were nighttime's petitions for folly. Rules hardened, bank the fire low. Keep tinder away from bed. Never hang a candle where sleep can reach. Lift the latch gently for the midnight pot. The last 2 bed walked the house like a watchman. When illness visited, beds became ships. Propping a chest with pillows turned a cough from siege to parley. Warm stones rotated like hands on a clock. Broths and possets arrived as medicine disguised as supper. A crack on the lee side taught air to come and go politely. A blessed candle steadied fear. By dawn, the bed's weather surrendered to the rooms. The first up tested coals, pulled a boot to measure luck, and sent breath ahead like a scout. Bedding folded, roles reversed. The bed kept the day's clothes warm while the house relearned work. Feathers resettled. Straw side. Dogs stretched and reconsidered duty. A good night did not guarantee a good winter. It bought leverage. Warm sleep made hands more accurate, tempers kinder, and illnesses less greedy. But cold months chose their moments. Disease liked crowds, damp, and thin diets. The same rooms that guarded heat could trap breaths. The next lesson belongs to that quieter enemy, how winter invited sickness, and how people argued back. Lullabies stitched sleep's edge. A mother's prayer steadied the room. A father's proverb set the next day's pace. Silence helped shared breathing, taught the house to rest, stirred the embers to a morning red. We stepped from blankets to breath. The season of frailty begins here. Winter pressed even when larders held and fires behaved. Cold narrowed blood, damp fed mold. Crowds shared breaths, and thin light dimmed resolve. The house that saved heat sometimes trapped air. The village that pooled labor also pooled illness. No plague banners were needed. Ordinary fevers, stubborn coughs and stomach upsets could tilt thin months toward danger. Households built defenses that looked like etiquette: food choices, fire habits, cleaning, and cautious company. Begin with hunger's shadow. Even competent storage meant diets heavier on grain and roots, lighter on fresh greens. No one spoke of vitamins, but bodies noticed. Gums bled easier, wounds sulked, skin cracked and invited trouble. Cabbage and brine and onions and everything were not only flavor, they hedged efficiency. Ale, safer than some wells, carried calories and a whisper of strength. Goats gave small milkings, butter slept under brine, cheese held summer in patient wheels. Air was another ration. A banked fire and tight shutter conserved coals but asked lungs to barter. Smoke irritation blurred with coughs from other causes. Good households aired rooms fast and early, a shutter flung wide for the time it takes to say a psalm. Embers brightened, then the room sealed again. Bedding breathed whenever sun visited. The language was domestic. The logic was epidemiology before the word existed. Crowding tightened transmission. Families formed a small climate behind curtains and by the oven. Alehouses pulled neighbors toward steam and story. Churches gathered breath into chant on bitter mornings. Markets and fairs moved joy and germs together. Etiquette adapted. Share ladles, less pass cups with thought. Wash hands as if piety were practical. A house proud of order made fewer funerals, though none escaped them all. Illness wore familiar names. Fevers that ran and broke. Coughs that lingered past a saint's day. Quincy's swelling throats. Agues that shook bodies. Winter flux that punished infants and elders. Eye inflammations raised by smoke in close hands. The vocabulary was imprecise but observant, tuned by patterns. Wet weeks, then coughs, fasts to stern, then weakness. Crowds, then bell ropes. Busy care was kindness organized. Broths moved first, chicken where possible, pea and onion where not, honey soothed, vinegar cleaned, garlic dead breath to clear. Herbs traveled in steam and poultice. A posset before bed could turn a coughing night into a negotiated one. Fever suggested cool cloths and patience. Aches met warmed stones and sleep promoted to duty. Quarrels paused. Quiet healed faster than scolding. Midwives and wise women did more than births. They kept recipes for chest syrups and gargles, memorized which herb befriended lungs or nerves, and read skin like weather. They knew when to fetch the priest and when to shoo him because a patient needed sleep more than ceremony. Priests brought sacraments and sometimes leech. Monasteries kept herb gardens and baths. Learning and law shared the same bench. Contagion had folk rules. Do not sit in another's warmed chair before it cools. Do not borrow pillows. Keep a fevered person's spoon out of the common bowl. Boil cloths used for certain sicknesses. Open the shutter on wash days so steam won't sulk in beams. Throw out the first bucket from the well after hard rain. None guaranteed safety. Together they bent chances. Death stayed near without always entering. Winter funerals sounded particular. Boots on frozen lane, bell on keen air, psalms steady as breath. Villagers left billets by a door. Bread on a sill, a shift of watching so a household could sleep one unbroken hour. Some illnesses struck harder when diets thinned and air closed. Pneumonias that drowned. Diphtherias gripped influenzas under other names. Children lost teeth for reasons bigger than sugar and smaller than fate. Elders who had earned many marches sometimes failed this one for no other reason than 3 damp weeks and 1 stubborn cough. We speak gently here. Some ended their winters too early off to themselves when grief overran counsel and helped the living stay. Even in sickness, the calendar worked. Fast rules bent in practice when a spoon of fat meant sleep. Candlemas lights pushed fear back a step. Saints' days brought broth from 3 kitchens and a loaf from a 4th. Community was the tonic winter invented. Kinder seasons returned, and the same rules still mattered. Air rooms quickly, feed broth first, respect fatigue, trust the woman who has seen 10 winters of coughs, and remembers who lived and why. In that memory lay a medicine chest larger than any cupboard. Night keeps another remedy besides plants and prudence. Song, a house that sings, moves breath through lungs and sorrow through time. The next room over is warm, ale has cleared, candles are short, a carol begins, or a work chant that feels like prayer with a beat. Spoons are down, draw closer to the hearth. We listened for music that measured winter and kept hands steady. Winter's soundscape was smaller and closer than summer's. Doors thudded, latches clicked, wind whispered through thatch. Indoors, pots, side spoons, tapped bowls like polite knocks. Voices carried warmth as the hearth carried it from cold to skin. Carols belonged to long nights. Verses were inherited quilts, patched, mended, shaken out each year. Children learned them by standing under the words like rain. Melodies traveled from nave to lane and back, changed by weather and by whoever sang loudest. Some were walking songs built for breath in cold air. Others were fireside pieces where a refrain let hands turn the spit or mend a seam. Many were catechisms in disguise, doctrine sewn into rhyme so memory would not drop it. Work songs kept winter from fraying. Threshing had a beat. Old men swore grain behaved better if the rhythm was honest. Flails answered in antiphone, one pair there, one pair here. The barn made into a drum. Carding and spinning chose gentler meters, humming pulse tunes that fitted draw, twist, wind. A smith worked to stricter time. Bellows sigh to clean blows. Irons whisper in water. Sing wrong and tools sulked. Sing right and time consented to pass. Alehouses turned sound into company. A winter alehouse was not riot. It was a stove for talk. Candles wrote small suns on pewter. The hearth kept a red grammar, and the room filled with complicated listening. Stories arrived bearing last summer's color and last century's varnish. Most nights counted voices, part songs that began with two people and fetched a third by the chorus. Rumor learned manners when it had to rhyme. Brewing taught rhythm to cool weather favored clean fermentations. Mashed tons and coppers hummed. Stir, rest, test, draw off. Shovel spent grain to a grateful pig. Fermentation sang almost audibly. An alewife heard health in the soft insistence under a wool cap. Serve the ale and you pour stored sunlight. It drinks like a calmer summer, and the room believes you. Silence worked as well. Late hush wrapped houses like a blessing. A last whisper about dews or seed, then a shared breath. The oven's quiet tick counted change from flame to brick, brick to warmth, warmth to sleep. Absence of noise was not emptiness. It was rest, the lid that keeps the pot kind. Music negotiated class without pretending to erase it. A lord's hall had more notes and longer echoes. A cottage had tighter harmonies, yet a tune stepped over thresholds that coin would not. At Christmas, waits played in streets where shutters opened gladly. On Plough Monday, hired men and households sang together, and, for a time, the year felt like one cloth instead of strips stitched with argument. Children read rooms by noise the way elders read weather by smoke. They knew where a story sounded bigger and which stair made the best drum. Their games kept winter meters. Quiet for chores, louder after midday, whispers when a baby slept. Church set the keynote. Advent chanted low. Christmas widened. Epiphany sparkled brief. Then weeks settled into ordinary time with melodies that kept hands moving. Candlemas brought beeswax light in a higher tone. Bells patterned days so well you could cook by them without looking at the sky. Outside, the world made music from physics. Brooks froze in plates that tinkled when cattle drank. Ash trees creaked. Barn doors moaned when wind leaned. Snow had registers. Dry squeak for the hardest mornings. Muffled powder for work. Wet slap for afternoons that asked you to hurry home. Songs also bridged moments that feared silence. Digging a grave in frost wanted a tune so iron wouldn't sound like judgment. Carrying an ill child wanted a hum so the air might remember mercy. Mending a roof in a gale needed a shouted refrain that kept hands believing they could finish before the light failed. These were not performances, they were bridges. Sometimes melody persuaded rumor to stay small. A verse could carry correction without bruising pride. Sing it again, but leave out the bit about the miller, someone would say, and the song learned manners. A village that edits itself in melody suffers fewer long feuds. Winter's final instrument was the door latch. 3 knocks at a late hour meant help, 2 meant news. 1 meant a neighbor who had miscounted his candles and needed a small loan of light. The answer was practical, a ladle of stew, An ember in a pan, a stool by the fire for 10 minutes and then off with you. Mind the drift. Charity went further when it moved on the breath of a song. The house quiets now. Embers are low. A child finishes a snatch of rhyme in sleep. The last mug is rinsed. Beyond the shutter, a different music begins, the faint groan of ground, loosening its iron. When a morning finally arrives with a soft edge, people will shoulder tools and step into a phrase older than any carol. The first furrow drawn into waking earth. Hush the room. Keep the tune under your breath. Tomorrow we listen to the plow speak in black lines and hopeful steam. When the cold loosens its bite and frost writes thinner letters on the sill, winter shifts from siege to truce. Not yet spring, but the thought of it, their air smells less metallic. The lane no longer breaks underfoot like pottery. A morning arrives with a strange softness at the edges. Breath clouds, yes, but the sun has a patience that did not visit in January. Someone turns a boot toe into the garden and the topmost inch yields with a sigh. Hope travels on such small reports. The village listens to fields the way sailors listen to tide. A hedge that dripped all winter now merely glistens. Ditches, cut faithfully in Advent, carry melt water with decent manners. Skylarks test the sky. Cattle push noses into air as if reading a letter. The reeve walks with a stick, strikes a clod, nods once. A decision has moved from rumor to plan. The plow team will go out. To plow is to compose the first sentence of a year. The team stands ready, 2, 4, or 6 oxen depending on purse and soil. Their winter weight shows in patient eyes and broad necks. A boy rubs the nearest with a hedgerow curry and murmurs what passes for theology among beasts. Good, steady, there. Collars fitted, chains checked, pins proven. The share greased so soil will slide. A prayer that is more habit than plea. Keep the harness honest. Keep the furrow true. Keep the ground from remembering last year's mistakes. The first cut writes black on brown. Earth rolls, shines, breathes. Steam lifts like news. Birds arrive as if summoned. Taking seeds the plow will not pity, and pests the plow cannot see. The handleman keeps the line with small corrections that feel like mercy, not force. Behind him, the sewer doesn't yet walk. Today is only preface. Today, the village reminds itself that it can still move in concert with ground. Tools gathered through winter pay their debt. The share that was sharpened on a gray afternoon. The wedge reset by lamplight. The yoke pin turned by a careful hand. It stands between labor and waste. If a bolt holds, a man's back holds. If a shoe stays on the near ox, nobody spends noon hunting iron in half-thawed ruts. Maintenance proves itself in minutes. Negligence, in seconds. Not every field consents on the same day. Clay sulks and must be courted. Sandy ground yields too wisely and must be watched for shallowness. Low places hide old weather. A wise teamster runs a test line at the edge, gauges how the share sings, then chooses the pattern. Straight furlongs for fairness and speed, or a shape that suits an awkward corner. Open field strips, interleaved with a dozen neighbors, demand choreography older than any living man-turn here. Mind that ridge, leave the headland ready for the next pair. Children carry the season in errands. They fetch pins, bring a cup, run messages to hedges where adults have turned briefly into surveyors. They learn with feet and eyes what books cannot teach: how a line bows to a buried stone, how a slope wants a shorter chain, how a team tells you in breath and shoulder when you are asking for folly. By noon they are experts enough to scold a cousin 2 years older. The house hears the furrow. In kitchens, dough grows braver. A pot waits for the returning spoon. With a little extra brew, days multiply. Thin ale becomes the day's argument for patience. Clothesline proverbs return. Air your wool when the furrow shines. Turn mattresses when the first lark lies. Candle stubs last one evening less. Light is promoted from necessity to company. Hope does not erase limits. Stores still rule choices. Fast days still meter appetite. A cold snap may return, smug and brief, to explain pride to plowmen. But the first furrow changes posture. It tells the room that effort can once again deposit value into the future instead of merely purchasing survival. A coin has reappeared that the winter economy could not mint. Sowing sits just ahead. Rye and wheat, if autumn failed them, may take a second chance where climates allow. Oats wait like agreeable cousins. Barley, loyal to lighter ground, rehearses its part. Beans and peas, humble founders of spring protein, will reclaim their lanes. A field set last year to fallow answers with a green hush when manured and flirted with the harrow. If lambs are late, their voices soon correct the quiet. The social calendar shifts with the soil. Hiring fairs wake from their nap. Manors set plow days and lists. The court baron adds disputes about headlands and wheel ruts to its docket. Gleaning talk goes silent. It will speak again at harvest. For now, rights of way, rights of water, and rights of patience occupy the village's tongue. Even rumor grows kinder. The miller's measure, the alewife's mash, the parson's new verse all sound less like verdicts and more like weather. Under the surface, old engineering continues. Drainage learned in a wet century survives a dry spring as prudence. Varieties that forgave last year's insult get planted again. A new ridge, steeper by a hand's breadth, pays its share in fewer lost afternoons. The village remembers scars as maps. Memory is a tool with the advantage of charging no fee. This is hope in its most muscular form, not a feeling, but the habit of beginning well. The furrow's straightness is a moral, its depth, a prayer in inches, its seam, a seam in hunger's coat. When the team halts at dusk and the last slice lays like a dark ribbon, someone says, without theater, "That will do," and the day feels answered. Tomorrow the sowing song will begin, short lines for long work, humor where backs needed, a refrain that fits the throw of grain. But before that chorus, we step aside from romance to clarity. What did peasants actually do well? What did they merely survive? Which modern myths about their winters are fair, and which deserve to be broken like clods under a new blade? The field breathes. The handles lean against the hedge. We turn to reckon stories with evidence. How do you sleep when the wind owns your house? We asked that at the beginning. Now the room knows the answer. You bank a fire with ash until it remembers dawn. You pull linen close and lay wool over it. You hang a rushlight where a page can keep its place. You make a small climate and you keep your promises to it. Hunger was managed by patience, cold by choreography, fear by companions. A peasant winter was not a single mood. It was a machine made of customs, and the machine ran because hundreds of quiet decisions were made correctly, day after day. Listen to the inventory the year leaves on the table. Grain counted and kept dry above the floor. Roots tucked into earth cool dark. Pork turned into months by salt and smoke. A clay oven that stores yesterday's flame until it can beat tomorrow's crust. A door that opens with manners so drafts do not swagger. A louver that obeys. A quern that remembers every dawn it sang. A bed that is a tent, then a raft, then a harbor. The list is not poetry, it is equipment. The sound it makes is relief. We learned that the house was a heat engine before anyone drew a diagram. That feast and fast were gears rather than morals. That charity was infrastructure. That rumor edited by song could be turned from a blade into a plowshare. We traced a disaster 3 wet years that taught the cost of eating seed and then looked up to a larger sky that cooled and fussed, turning averages into argument. The rhythm bent, people bent with it. Resilience is what culture does when weather stops being polite. If you take only one lesson to your own winter, let it be this. Comfort is a practice. Heat the person, not the room. Light the task, not the night. Spend richly on feast when morale is low, and spend strictly afterwards so memory can carry you. Store what forgives time, grains, legumes, honey, vinegar, stories. Maintain before it hurts. Hinge, flue, rope, friendship. Trust the neighbor with a loaf more than the rumor with a crown. And if the sky sulks, shorten your wagers and lengthen your songs. There is tenderness in competence. Watch a hand lift a pot lid just enough that steam can speak without escaping. Watch a child roll a rush pith between fingers, lay it in fat, and set it to burn with a seriousness that would shame a bishop. Watch a woman tie a hood so the knot sits where wind cannot find it, then tie a second, loose a knot in a child's string so it will fail safely. These are not quaint gestures. They are a grammar of survival, and grammar, used well, makes music. The myths that painted peasants as frozen or foolish fade under this light. They were neither saints of scarcity nor fools of mud. They were engineers of enough. They made heat with smoke and proximity. They made plenty out of choreography more often than out of luck. They endured because they paced themselves, because the year's bell taught appetite to keep time, and because houses were built as arguments for hope. Stand one more time in that low doorway. The latch sits right in the hand. Smoke softens the beams. The dog, persuaded by the glamour of embers, chooses his place and becomes part of the insulation. The pot says little but means well. You can hear the field in the rafters, the cellar under your feet, the church in the hush between breaths, the manor in the hinge that doesn't betray you. If the wind insists, the wall answers. If the dark asks questions, the rushlight makes small, clear replies. Soon a softer morning will arrive, the kind that loosens the lane and draws locks upward. Oxen will lean into the earth. A first furrow will shine black and promising. Birds will turn the line into punctuation. But even before that day, the winter room holds. It holds because people kept faith with work, with one another, and with the idea that tomorrow can be invited by how you behave tonight. That is civilization at its smallest honest scale. So close your eyes, let the coals find their slow red. Let the bed's little climate gather you. If the bell rings, it will be for bread or prayer or plowing. All three are good. If it is silent, all the better. Sleep is also a craft, and you have tools for it now. When you wake, you will know which door to open and for how long, which pot to move and how far, which story to repeat, because it keeps the room brave. That is how peasants endured the winter in medieval Europe. That is how anyone does. The house exhales, the latch rests, the wind goes looking for another story to pound. Inside, the last rushlight gives a kind, brief bow, and the room quiet, warm, exact becomes dark in the useful way that makes morning possible. Before sleep fully takes you, hold the inventory once more like prayer, bread to break, broth to share, a hinge that will not betray and wet, a neighbor who listens, a song that edits a rumor, a cloak that makes weather negotiable, a candle saved for the night that deserves it. These are small riches. Count them slowly. They are not the opposite of luxury. They are the shape of durable joy,